When you're talking about the Canadian real estate market, the Prairie cities are some of the hottest real estate markets in Canada. And yet right now, every one of them is seeing home prices declining. And I'm going to explain to you why that's completely normal. Hey there, welcome back to Bold Prairie Real Estate. My name is 𝗵𝗲𝗍𝗂, real estate agent in Regina, Saskatchewan, and that is my trusted assistant, 𝗫𝗲𝗍𝗂. This is my monthly Canadian real estate market update for the month of October. I'm going to be focusing on Calgary, Edmonton, Saskatoon, Regina, and Winnipeg in this video. I cover a bunch of other Canadian cities. I'll put the links to those videos in the description below if they're ready. By the time you are watching this video, we'll cover all across the entire country here, breaking down cities individually. But of course, as we always do here, we're going to start off with another one of my terrible bad dad jokes. Honestly, I'm not sure why Marvel doesn't use the Hulk in more of their advertising. He's basically a giant banner. If you have a terrible joke I can use in a future episode, put it in the comments below. Let's figure out what's going on in the Canadian real estate market here. Let's kick things off talking about the Regina real estate market, which saw the busiest September on record, and it really wasn't even close. We're still seeing tons of multiple offers in Regina and a lot of houses selling over asking, in some cases very significantly. This is generally the time of year though where I talk about, hey, things are starting to slow down as the weather cools off, so does the market. And I am seeing that, but it's still absolutely crazy right now. And these stats are going to blow your mind. Let's start off talking about home sales here. The 375 homes that sold last month, absolutely crazy busy. In fact, it is the busiest September on record. And it's not even that close. Taking a look here, you can see like we crushed last year. You have to go back to 2020 to find a month that's somewhat close, and it's really not. 340 homes sold in the month. And we also saw an increase in sales from August to September. That typically doesn't happen. Usually it's the other way around. That's why September is so notable this month or this year in Regina. And I'm recording this video halfway through October. And October's shaping up to be pretty busy as well. Don't think it'll be quite as busy as September, but it's busy. Now, if you're shopping for homes right now in Regina, this is some good news for you. The 470 homes that are new listed for sale in the month is a fairly big month for new listings. And this is good because we need new listings coming to the market in Regina. You can see we're up a fair bit versus last year, just barely above the 5-year average. So we need this inventory in Regina to get some stability back in the market. Unfortunately, for the most part, that big jump in new listings was eaten up almost entirely by that strong month in sales. And you can see that here in the active inventory, still well under 600 homes for sale, down significantly versus last year. And last year was really, really tight for inventory. And actually we saw kind of reversal in trend looking at, month by month in the 5-year here. We had seen that gap had been shrinking, and then it kind of started to open back up again here. Small amount. Look at 2019, 2018, 2017 type time frame, 1,1600 active listings, and we got under 600 right now. So essentially a third of what we had in that time frame. Again, market was not only more balanced, it was definitely more favoring buyers back then, but you can just see how quickly things have changed in the Regina real estate market. Let's dive into the market balance stats here. So we're looking at months of inventory, sales to new listing ratio, sales to active listing ratio, and see what things we can see in the numbers here. In months of inventory, which is how long it takes for all the inventory to run out if no new listings came on the market, month and a half, that is virtually nothing. We're seeing it decline again here. 1 month doesn't make a trend, but this usually doesn't happen this time of year. The sales to new listing ratio, which is kind of that early barometer, what's going on in the market, that continues to get higher, meaning the market is getting tighter. The larger this number gets, the more it's favoring sellers and the more aggressive and more the market's kind of heating up. And you can see here, where the highest it's been at this time of year, with really only last year being kind of close there at 79%, and then it drops off fairly significantly. So this as a buyer is not really what you want to see, meaning we're seeing fewer new listings and more sales happening, kind of tightening the market up. And we'll dive into sales to active listing ratio, which we would expect would be starting to decline a little bit. Again, market usually cooling off. And we saw that, you can see from May, it's dropping, and then September picks back up again. This is because of how strong the sales were this past month. September might have been that one-off month where things really jumped up a bunch because it doesn't take much in our market. A dozen or 2 dozen sales is going to really skew these numbers one way or the other. I have a feeling we're going to see the overall trend of the market cooling off represented in next month's stats. Let's talk about prices now, because I've been saying how hot the Regina real estate market is, and yet we're seeing this benchmark price month over month start to cool off a little bit. And that's very typical. Now, this doesn't mean all of a sudden, a house that was $300,000 yesterday is going to be $295,000 and you're getting all these deals and houses. It's just because there's less competition than in the spring, which is really driving prices up. I'm going to tell you a real quick story here. I just sat down the other day with a young couple getting ready to buy their first home. They actually moved from Vancouver to Regina because they can afford to buy a house here. They're never going to be able to afford to buy a house in Vancouver, and they're super excited to get started. And I am excited to be their agent, and I would love to be your agent as well if you're looking at buying a house in Regina. But if you're not in Regina, I can still help you out because I've got a great network of agents across the entire country. If you look in the description of this video, down there's going to be a link to my calendar where you can book me in for a call. Diving into the Saskatoon stats here. Now, generally, Saskatoon reacts a little bit quicker than what we see in Regina. So if you see trends there, that can be kind of an indicator what we're expecting to see in Regina to some degree. And in Saskatoon, we're seeing a little bit more of a market that's cooling off. Again, a big part of that seasonal. Talking with agents there, they're saying there's a lot of buyer frustration, just completely fed up with the bidding wars and offer dates and stuff like that. And they're getting some pushback from buyers saying, I'm not going to play that game anymore. And they're kind of sitting on the sidelines or picking their opportunities to get into a house that doesn't have as much competition. But you can look at the stats here. It's still really, really busy. Let's dive into it. So looking at sales numbers here, August, September, both just slightly below last year. The big jump up here in September was versus the 5-year average, up to about 9% in Saskatoon. So a really busy September. And actually, one more thing to note here is just look at sales year to date, 4,000 homes sold already, and just compare it to 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019 type time frame. They don't even come close to 4,000 homes sold in the entire year, and there's 4,000 sold already. There's probably about another 1,000-ish homes that are going to sell so far in Saskatoon. So again, this is probably going to be the second busiest year for home sales ever in Saskatoon. If you are out house shopping in Saskatoon, this is what you want to see though. 725 new listings. That's a big month for new listings for September, up 10% versus the 5-year and versus last year. So good news for home buyers. We're seeing more new listings come to the market. It needs to continue to balance out the market. You look here when we get active listings, it's nowhere near where it needs to be. And speaking of active listings, there's under 700 homes for sale in Saskatoon, below last year, significantly below the 5-year. But looking at the trends here, you can see at least that gap is shrinking here. It's not getting worse. So that's a little bit of good news for home buyers in Saskatoon. Now let's take a look at the market balance trends. Months of inventory, sales to new listing ratio, sales to active listing ratio. Month of inventory, this is some good news for home buyers, trending up. So we're seeing the market cool off a little bit. Again, some of this is seasonal. Some of it's just the market getting recalibrated a little bit. Now looking at sales to new listing ratio, they've crossed an important threshold. With that being at 59%, that means we are officially now for Saskatoon in this metric in a balanced market, although at the very top end of the range, again, 40 to 60 is a balanced market. Now, sales to active listing ratio, this is bonkers because we started the year, or not started the year, in the beginning of the spring market, that May timeframe, 123%, which is absolutely crazy. It is cooled off to 66%. That's still well into a seller's market with nothing even really comparably remotely close here. Let's talk about home prices. Saskatoon, one of the hottest real estate markets in Canada, and yet home prices dropping. Yes, they are, but this is also very normal for this time of year. In years that prices have gone up or gone down, you see a bump in the spring and a cooling off in the back part of the year. So we kind of expected this. This is really the only first month we've had this year, month-over-month price decline, and a very small one at that, but a trend down. And you can see it, in previous years. Look at last year, 2024. Everybody knows and says that was a hot year. Prices started at 375, they increased to over 400 in July, and then cooled back off to 395 in December. So this is typical for this time of year, even in a busy red hot year in Saskatoon. Okay, Winnipeg, I'll be nice to you. I won't wear my Rider jersey in this video, but the Riders have already wrapped up first place and they're going to win the Grey Cup in Winnipeg this year. Sorry, that's just what's going to happen. You can roast me in the comments if that doesn't happen. We'll have some fun with it. Let's talk home sales here. Almost 1,400 homes sold in Winnipeg last month, basically identical to the previous month. And in fact, one of the busiest Septembers on record in Winnipeg. Look at sales year to date, over 12,000 homes year to date. Wind back 2016, less than 12,000 for the entire year. 2017, just over 12,000. And even in 2019, a little under 13,000 sales for the entire year. We've got more sales than basically all of those years in totality. Probably going to see another, 2,000, about 3,000 homes will probably sell Winnipeg. So they're going to be 15, 16,000 homes sold. It's going to be essentially the second or third busiest year in Winnipeg's history. Taking a look at new listings here, 2,200 above last year, above the 5-year average. That's actually pretty typical for Winnipeg this time of year. Looking at active listings versus the 5-year average, barely up, but that's really just because of how badly skewed things were in 2021, where there's 2,800 active listings at the same time of the year, and then 2019 over 5,000, and this continues on if you go further back. So really, it's that 2021 timeframe that really skews the stats there. Let's take a look at the market balance stats here. We'll start off with months of inventory, 2.7 months of inventory, meaning that the Winnipeg real estate market is still a seller's market according to this metric. It is trending up. So a little bit of softening in the market here. Good news for some home buyers that are out shopping right now. Let's take a look at sales to new listing ratio, and that has trended just on the cusp of it's still a seller's market, almost in a balanced market. You're going to see kind of a trend here going on in Winnipeg that's actually softened up a little bit. So more new listings coming to the market, balancing things out a little bit. Taking a look here at sales to active listing ratio, still very much in seller's market territory at 38.4, but trending to cooling off, more balanced. So we have peaked out in May here. You have to get below 20 to even get into a balanced market. So well above that right now. And home prices, well, they're technically actually dropping month over month. That is to be expected. You can see here as we go through the charts that you see prices ramp up in the spring. They fall off in the cooler months, even when months or years when prices have gone up. So we start the year $363,000, ramped up here, got up to almost $390,000 in May. Actually, we did basically touch that in June. And then we've seen it soften a little bit here. Very typical. Let's look at last year, for example. Started $335,000, got all the way up to $360,000, and then dropped just a little bit. So you see that. This is what happens in Winnipeg, and I expect we're going to see prices cool a little bit through the rest of the year, but I don't think you're going to see a massive drop-off in prices. Let's dive into Calgary here. Of course, a year and a half, 2 years ago, by far, hottest market in Canada. Everybody's trying to buy a place in Calgary, especially Toronto, Vancouver, trying to pour money into there, catch the boom, and we've seen a pretty big reversal this year. Let's dive into the stats here. Sales, 1,700 homes sold, down significantly versus last year and a 5-year average. Calgary real estate market is crashing. Let's rewind the clock here a little bit. How does it stack up versus, kind of the non-crazy times? 2019, the last year before things went bonkers, 1,400 homes sold. 2018, 1,300 homes sold. And I could continue this chart back even further, but you're going to get the point just by looking at those 2 years. So yes, much slower than the craziest years all time. Significantly busier than anything but those years. The good news as a home buyer in Calgary is you're getting more choice, and it's coming on relatively quickly. 37, almost 3,800 new listings this past month, up versus last year, up significantly versus a 5-year. Again, though that time frame, new listings are way down. Now, when people are looking at active inventory, this is where people are kind of lighting their hair on fire and going bonkers. There's almost 7,000 active listings and a big jump up from last month, which generally we don't see that as common. Looking more historically, this is kind of on the lower end or about normal for a more balanced market. Take a dive here into the market balance stats, starting off with months of inventory, now at 4 months of inventory. Just last year in 2024, there was less than 1 month of inventory here. And then looking at sales to new listing ratio, this continues to trend down. We're going to see when we get the October stats, this list or this metric is going to show it is a buyer's market in Calgary here. That's what I'm expecting. How about sales to active listing ratio? Yeah, it's still technically a seller's market by this metric. Again, this is saying it's not only a fairly strong seller's market, and it has been essentially all year long, according to this metric. Clearly, with prices declining, it's not a strong seller's market. So clear trend in terms of it being trending back towards balanced buyer's market territory in Calgary. Okay, let's talk about home prices in Calgary now, because of course, for the last few years, we've been talking about how much home prices have been increasing in Calgary. And now we're talking about how much home prices are decreasing, down 4% year over year. In fact, that's not only a substantial amount just for this year, but if you put it up in the leaderboard of home price decreases so far this year, Calgary is up near the top, actually, seeing a $10,000 decrease in prices from the start of the year, about a $20,000 decrease in prices from when they peaked out in that March-April timeframe. We're essentially back to 2023 prices in Calgary now. Unlike Calgary, home prices, they're still increasing. Calgary is the only place here in this market update where we're actually seeing year-over-year price declines, but Edmonton is definitely slowing down, especially when I talk to agents there, they're feeling it day to day. Let's dive into the stats here and see what's going on. Starting off with home sales, almost 2,200 homes sold in a month. And of course, the headline everybody talks about, it's down 3% year over year. I'll continue to say it. Last year in Edmonton was by far the busiest year for home sales, with nothing even close. This is going to be the second busiest year for home sales on record in Edmonton. It's just when you're comparing year over year, it looks terrible. If you are out house shopping in Edmonton, the good news here is that new listings picked up. And they're up fairly substantially, not just versus the 5-year, but previous years as well. This is the most new listings in any of those years for the month of September. So for home buyers, you're seeing more choice come to the market right now. One other thing I want to point out here is I'm just looking at the stats. Year to date, about 3,400 new listings. And you can see last year, 3,700 new listings. And I expect we're going to get really, really close and probably exceed the 2024 numbers. I bet you they're going to get awfully close to 40,000 new listings once the year's all said and done. Now, if all you read about the Edmonton real estate market is that active inventory is up basically 25%, you'd say, holy, there are so many houses for sale. And compared to basically any other normal year, this is actually fairly low. So it's getting back to those times. It's still got a long ways to go. Let's take a look at some of the market balance trends here. We'll start with months of inventory at 3.2, means Edmonton pushed into that balance market territory for this metric. And you can see it's up versus last year, but in fact, again, versus any other year that's not last year, we're basically on the low end of the range. There you go. Let's talk sales new listing ratio here. At 60%, that means it's right on the edge between sellers and balanced. It has been trending down, meaning the market's been softening in Edmonton. Essentially here since April, we got May is kind of the outlier there. We'll dive into sale to active listing ratio here. Again, downward trend, meaning a market that's softening up. Now at 31. Again, this still puts it well into seller's territory, but also is why you don't want to look at these kind of in a vacuum, because you could absolutely cherry pick just this stat and say, look, it's a super tight seller's market in Edmonton. Looking at this sales to active listing ratio, it's just not as competitive as it was last year. Now let's talk about home prices in Edmonton, where they are declining. And that's completely expected and normal actually here. So we peaked out here by the looks of things, unless something changes. I don't expect it will. Let's look at last year. Started at 376, increased all the way to almost $410,000 in, you guessed it, June. And then prices continue to decline. And again, last year, best year ever, basically at Edmonton. Prices were ripping, sales were going bonkers. It's just very much a Prairie phenomenon. All these cities, you're going to see this prices run up in the spring, June, July, August-ish. They start to soften and they cool off through the rest of the year. So we've got home prices declining in every one of these cities month over month. And in Calgary, prices declining year over year. But still, for the rest of the Prairies, very busy, active market. Now, I want you guys to jump in the comments below and tell me, each one of these cities, where do you think home prices end the year? I'll be curious to see how close you guys get when we look back on this video in a couple of months. If you like this video too, please give me a like and subscribe to Prairie Real Estate if you haven't already.